Future Proof Mzansi, a podcast where we discuss how consumer behavior shapes our marketing plans. I'm Stacey.
And I'm Senna. We're colleagues at Kantar and your hosts. On this podcast, we interview some of the most creative minds and innovative thinkers about the many impactful brands in the country and why people love them.
We discuss what makes South Africans tick, why they do the things they do, and what those things are.
Most importantly, through our discussions, we offer practical advice for how to take your marketing forward and build brands tomorrow.
Senna, I am super excited because today is our very first episode of Future Proof Mzansi, and we are kicking things off by interviewing a legend in the creative industry. I've known our guest for several years. He works for an incredible brand and is very well known in the industry for always learning, experimenting, and trying out new things.
Artwell Nwaila is the head of creative for Google South Africa. He has also worked at renowned companies such as Caxton and Supersport, and he has 5 qualifications, including an MBA. He has experience in fine arts, publishing, advertising, photography, TV, and tech. And over the last few years, has focused on data and how that drives the creative process. Welcome, Artwell. We're so pleased to have you on this podcast as our first guest.
Thank you very much. That was an amazing intro. I enjoyed that.
Artwell, today we'll be discussing successful creative and why it's so important. Last year, Kantar co-published an analysis with the World Advertising Research Center, which we all know to be WARC, and they found that the most creative and effective ads generate more than 4 times the profitability of ineffective ads. And that's pretty compelling, but we wanted to chat today about what that means in practical terms. So discuss some of the best creative in South Africa and why it works. And we thought that you would be the perfect person to discuss this subject with, because we know you've got lots of learnings of your own, and particularly working with YouTube.
Yeah, Artwell. Okay, so we have a lot of questions for you, but I really want you to tell us more about yourself and just your career journey so far.
So my original passion and my original qualification is actually fine arts. So I'm an artist at heart. I'm very suitable for the name. I guess I try to do art well, just like the name says. And I know it's cheesy, dad joke.
It works though.
I love it.
And so that's where the journey really started. When I studied it, it became more of a passion, but that passion coincided with something that I don't like, which is poverty. And I was like, I don't want to be broke for the rest of my life. And so I self-taught myself graphic design. And that led me down the journey of going into publications soon after graduating. So I worked for Caxton, which was an amazing experience. And then from there, that sort of gave me a big jump into the advertising world. Worked in through the line agencies, below the line agencies and the like. And then worked my way into television, which was Supersport, which was super exciting. There was a combination of 2 things that I love, creativity and sports in one world. And luckily enough, one day I got a phone call from Google, and here I am, experiencing a completely new side of creative, which is the combination of creative, data, technology, and as you can imagine, it's every single day is a learning experience. So I kind of feel like I'm a constant student of creativity as it sits right now in the Google world. And I get to talk to people like you. So I'm excited. Thank you very much.
Artwell, how do we also get calls from Google? I want Google to phone me.
Study
I
fine
can't
art.
give away your secrets. Maybe I'll tend to have a super cool name like Artwell.
I think that was my selling point, is the name. They were like, this can't be real. Yeah.
So at Kantar, we measure creative effectiveness by 3 criteria. We talk about branded engagement, having a meaningful and differentiated message, and what that means for our ability to create brands that build demand. So in other words, is the creative enjoyed? Is it remembered in the name of the brand? Does it affect brand associations and land the right message? And ultimately, if we do all of that correctly, we'll be able to change consumer behavior in the direction we're hoping to do that. So I'd love to get your views on this. How do you think these 3 criteria have come through in local advertising on the year, over the year, and sort of based on the type of engagement that you see with ads on YouTube?
Yeah, what's interesting is the criteria that you have are very much aligned with the criteria that we have. It's just ours is structured in a different narrative, but we're saying exactly the same thing. And based on the experience that I've seen within the region, when I say region, my definition of the region is SSA, because that's what I look at, and they're very close similarities, whilst there are slight different nuances. We definitely do see the best practices being followed to an extent, and we can see it within the success rates of awards, right? If you look at international awards and look at the ads that are winning, and you look at the teams that are winning, they're really doing the things that we consider ABCDs compliant, where we look at the things that can drive success within a advert on YouTube. Now, I emphasize on YouTube because we did the study on YouTube, but I do believe that a lot of it is very true for anything that is digital, because how we consume content online today is different to TV, but similar on digital platforms, right? And whilst a lot of brands have not been, are not masters of the ABCDs, which is this framework I'm talking about, a lot of these things are learnings that do come from the outside world, which is above the line. Things like capturing attention from the onset, right? With any story that you tell, if you don't capture attention from the onset, it doesn't matter how much you invest on making the middle of the story powerful. If nobody is captured the attention, lose attention, and they drop off. Same goes with when they skip you. Same goes with Facebook when they scroll straight right past you, right? So we do see like the natural foundations of creating impactful creative being implemented. Now, where we see gaps is the new stuff, right? As you all know, people view content on mobile devices a lot today, and we sort of have to shift our storytelling to accommodate for that device. That's where we start to see the gaps from a building for platforms point of view.
I mean, that makes perfect sense. Perfect sense. You got to start with attention, and from that point, you can once you've got attention, that's simply another word for engagement, or at least a means to engagement, and then we can build the meaningful message and ultimately change behavior. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. And what are some of the themes that you've seen come through in 2023 when we talk about ads on YouTube?
So 2023 and 2022 has been a very, very interesting time because we've just come out of a pandemic. So it's probably one of the very few times where in a short space of time, we saw the trends shift and the trends come back, right? So what I mean by that is we all, went through a pandemic. Our messages had to be a little bit more sensitive, more responsible. All the ads were a little bit more somber, less humor, because it was irresponsible to be too funny. And there was a lot of sameness, but it was understandable because at the time we were all trying to share the same message of hope. And so 2022 and 2023, we start to see now a trend of moving out of that somber and bringing back a little bit more of lightheartedness. And this comes off a study which was called the Year in Ads, where we looked at every single ad on YouTube within 2022 and 2023. And we start to see people breaking out of that somberness. We start to see people starting to experiment with humor. Whilst in that time period, it wasn't too much in your face because we still had to be a bit, responsible, but we start to see an exploration of humor. But also what we start to see is vibrant color. And what's interesting is that we saw that in the time periods when it was the COVID peak periods, we did notice that the colors were quite neutral, right, to kind of fit the tone. And then when we look at like now from 2022 and 2023, the color of the year was Viva Magenta, which is a very, very vibrant and in your face kind of color. And that's representative of us sort of breaking out of somber and somewhat sad. And we also start to see a lot more people being placed together in adverts, right? We start to see people being outdoors. We start to see people going back to normality. Now, it's interesting that we talk about trends looking like that, because if you had asked me this question in 2018, the trends I'd be talking about would be completely different, right? But because we've had this big lifestyle change, that has happened since 2019, we've seen these very drastic trends.
Yeah, I remember that piano music of the pandemic very well.
Yes.
Everything was
Yes.
desperately somber. I remember that, and I laugh because I remember Viva Magenta when at the YouTube event that was hosted last year.
Yes.
It was a brand new color. I'd never even heard of it. It's somewhere between pink and purple.
And I'll be honest with you, it was also my first time hearing of that color. I had to look it up. And this is me, like a graphic designer at heart and an art director at heart, and here I didn't know of the color, but yeah.
Well, I just learned something from the both of you. So there is a new color to discover. Artwell, you touched on ads being funny and capturing that humor, and then also like vibrant. That falls in line with kind of our own research, because we find that people are less likely to skip ads if they are either one, funny or humorous, or two, they're in a category that they're interested in, or three, it's a brand that they're interested in. So other than like those core things that you've just mentioned, what other things keep people watching?
So I really like this question, because whenever I hold any kind of talks, there's one thing I always sort of emphasize on, and it's in the first 5 seconds, because your question really revolves around that skip button moment. If you treat those first 5 seconds like an audition, and you change your mindset of just placing the ad on the platform, people are less likely to skip. Now, the story arc that we all know and love and use is a story arc that's called the hill story arc. So it's the shape of a hill. So the story starts off very slow and gradual, and in the middle we have the climax, which is the fun part of the story, and then it drops off and it ends. Every single story that we know of is structured like this: Romeo and Juliet, theater stories, TV shows, movies, and it works really well, especially on an above the line platforms, right? And it's powerful because you build that suspense so that people can enjoy the treat in the middle of the movie, which is the climax. Now, because majority of people now are viewing content on mobile devices, and the number for YouTube is 70% of people globally view YouTube content on mobile devices, right? So we know that they're viewing on mobile devices. Their viewing patterns are substantially different than above the line viewing patterns. If I take a phone and I view a piece of content on it, the last thing I want is to have a slow lead in, right? I want to get straight into it. Now imagine you're stealing a moment while you're working and you just want to watch a quick video, and this car advert comes on, and it's this long, boring intro of a car driving up the hill, right? You want to get straight into it. So that's actually one of the big reasons why people get skipped, is because they use that hill story arc. What we recommend is to use a heartbeat story arc. And what we mean by that is that your most compelling stuff, you bring it in the first 5 seconds, aka you audition, right? So what that means is, if you have a compelling price point, put that right up front. If you have a funny moment, put that right up front. If you have a compelling question, because we're humans, we're wired to want to know what the answer is, put that right up front. And I know this is difficult for, like, let's say an insurance brand where they have to be serious, but even for insurance brands, there has to be a compelling moment in the ad, because otherwise, why are you making the ad? Your job is to sell something, right? So to answer your question in a very long-winded way, invest in the first 5 seconds to ensure that people continue to watch, aka bring your dessert right up front and your veggies at the end.
As a mom of two young kids, I don't know if I could get behind that.
Yeah, me too. I've got like a 5-year-old who right now would be saying, "Dad, stop it."
Yeah, Dad, you're telling different stories to different people. Thanks, Artwell. That was really great. And actually, you touched on something right at the end there that I want to talk a little bit more about. Is you said at the end of the day we're selling a product, and getting that engagement up front is what is so important. I think there's another element to it as well about managing the skip. And I think that's around the fact that, in my opinion, historically, we've spent all these years building ads for the digital platform that tend to be a call to action. And I think that's driven by the fact that we have such a short time to speak to our audience, to our consumers. And I think that building or considering or reconsidering the way we frame digital ads might also lend itself to to ensuring that people don't skip as frequently. And what I mean by that is, can we use the digital platform to build a brand story rather than simply using it as a place to call to action, to sell something or to give a price or that kind of thing? And I think if we can find, look, nobody's saying that that's easy, right? That's a big creative challenge, but I think it's worth investing in. If we can get that right, I think we will naturally drive the type of engagement and connection with our ad that's going to keep it going past the skippable time.
A lot of clients are using almost digital assets as a call to action piece, and not to do the bigger jobs of like driving consideration and all those other things. And we've actually seen through a lot of studies that we've done that you can build for the bottom of the funnel, the middle of the funnel, and at the top of the funnel. And you can create a full funnel strategy. And there are lots of tips and tricks to do this. I mean, one such example is if you're going to be doing an awareness job, your videos are going to be slightly shorter, right? And that's why bumpers work so well. Bumpers are 6-second ads. But if you're going to do a consideration job, you cannot do a consideration job in 10 seconds or 6 seconds. It's too little of time to get somebody to consider what you're trying to sell them. So therefore, consideration ads are slightly longer. And then that's where people go, oh, but people don't have the time span for watching long videos. Then we look at the data, and the same study I spoke about earlier on, the year in ad study, we saw that in that time period, people, advertisers were making adverts that were 30 seconds and longer, and a big chunk of those adverts were 1 minute long, right? Those were consideration ads, right? And you need time to make consideration, to drive consideration. But also, there's a caveat on that front, right? You can't make a 1 minute ad if your first 5 seconds doesn't hook, right? So there's obviously a lot of best practice that has to be done, but you can do all those, drive all those objectives if you follow correct best practices. And also, I think the most important thing that is potentially more powerful than just following best practices is really understanding your consumer. So there really is ability to push outside of call to actions. And I implore anybody who's advertising on digital platforms to have an experimental mentality, and that's really the only way that you can find what works for you.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Mm.
And let's chat about another way of creating engagement in the form of music. Do you have any thoughts on the type of music that works or doesn't work, or simply the use of music at all?
So music is an interesting one. So we don't have any data that specifically highlights a correlation between music and success, but different ways of using music can drive different types of successes, or even drop-offs, right? And a good example is there's an experiment that was run where fast-paced music was used on one type of advert, and slow-paced music was used on another type of advert. And the slow-paced music obviously made the ad feel slow-paced, and therefore we saw a bigger drop-off. Obviously, this is not like a silver bullet for, hey, every single ad now should have fast-paced music. It was just for that vertical and that client, and it was very nuanced, right? So music, if you experiment with it within your vertical, you can see what types work and what types don't work. I mean, there's a specific project I did with a client where we tested library music versus purchasing music. And this was specific to this client. So I just want to make a big caveat here that this is not a finding for everybody, right? And for this client, what we found was that the music which had library music performed equally as well as the one where they purchased the song for millions of bucks, right? And the reason for this was that the actual song that they paid for had no conceptual relevance to the actual ad, right? And so it actually landed as well as library music. And then on the flip side, what we've also found is that because 80% of all adverts on YouTube have music on them, some advertisers are getting clever and actually removing music. And what that does is that it differentiates the ad, right? And when you differentiate with anything on YouTube, you win. And first of all, what that means is that your message is now much more clearer. You it's not interrupted by any music, but your ad feels different, it sounds different, and it stands out. Now, obviously, if everybody starts doing this, then then it loses its effectiveness, and then we go back to music because that becomes effective. So there's like lots of things that you need to play around, but there's no definitive like study that we have that says there's a correlation between using rock and success, or hip hop and success, or using music as a whole and success. Yeah.
Artwell, I love that. I was thinking, when there's no music, it almost like forces you to look down because you feel like I must be missing something. It's the awkward pause, right? It's silent. What's going on? So I can see how that would draw attention to.
There's a difference though, right? So I'm talking about music. So you're talking about audio. With audio, we do receive a lot of ads that are completely silent, so they don't even have a person talking, right? And that feels like a broken experience. Like it just feels. Imagine turning on a TV and there's no sound on your ad. It feels like something's wrong with your TV. That actually drives people to skip, right? And we've ran an experiment where we've looked at one ad, and we've made 3 versions of it. One ad had sound and visuals. The one ad had visuals only, and the other had just sound only. And we looked at how they performed across awareness, consideration, and recall. And the one that performed the best was the one that had both, and the ones that performed the worst were the ones that had neither, right? And the reason being is YouTube is a leaned-in platform. People go there to hear and see. And when one of the things is not working, so if they can't see it, if they can't hear it, they feel it's broken and they skip because they don't have time to try to figure out what's going on.
Well, that's so interesting about the sort of like if the audio is missing, that could actually drive people to skip. And it got me so curious about visuals. So are there any sorts of visuals that actually would prompt people to skip, or maybe visuals that would drive people to engage?
The best way to answer that it would be to say that it's actually less about the visual types themselves, but it's more about how you use your visuals. And now, because we know that majority of people utilize mobile devices, what we recommend is ensure that there is bright contrasts in your visuals. And the reason why we say this is a lot of the phones are set to auto dim, right? And if not, those who are tech savvy will put the dimness quite low to save battery life. What that means is that if you're going to have an ad that's very gray and very dark, it's hard to view and it's not a nice viewing experience. And whenever there's no nice viewing experience, people just move on and they skip. So bright contrast. This doesn't mean that you can't shoot your ads at night. You can, just need to make sure that your brights are bright and your darks are dark, and it's not living in that gray world. Another thing is about framing. So your visuals should be framed in accordance to accommodating mobile devices. So what I mean is that, frame quite nice and tight at key moments. That's a very important thing to note. What we're not saying is that the whole ad should be like super zoomed in. That's just very uncomfortable. But at key moments, right? So if there's a product, if you're showing how a product is used, if you're landing a specific point, if there's a joke, or if there's an appearance of a celebrity at a key moment, that's when you zoom in. But you still want that rich zooming in and out. But you need to make sure it's at key moments. And why we say this is that even on mobile devices, if you hold your phone like vertically, there are instances where the screen, especially in our region where phones are smaller, where the screen can be the size of a matchbox, right? So now if you're going to show a product display, somebody pouring milk into a glass and they're standing at the back of the room, it's not going to land. So it's how you optimize your visuals for the places where people will view it, right? And we know that it's mobile devices. The question I usually get after this is, okay, but we know that people are watching a lot of YouTube on TV. Do we need to optimize for that too? No, not really. We know that if you optimize for mobile devices, it will work on the big screen, but it won't work vice versa. So, and the same goes for TV, right? If you shoot your TV ad with a mindset that this is going to go onto digital devices, at least you've solved for both. But if you shoot purely for TV, you then have to do the optimizing for mobile devices.
Thanks, Artwell. So I want to take us back just a little bit to something that you mentioned earlier, which was all around the framework that you at YouTube use to guide advertisers on how to create great content. And I use the word content quite specifically because we can create ads or we can create content. And content is the stuff that is engaging. It's the stuff that's going to keep people wanting to watch whatever you're putting out there. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about the framework that you use to guide our creatives?
Sure. So it's called the ABCDs of building creative adverts for YouTube, and basically what it is it's findings that we found by running experiments, by looking at ads, by really studying what drives awareness, consideration, and recall, by looking at what drives people to skip, what drives people to watch a whole ad. Now, what we've been very careful to ensure that we always highlight is we're not by any means telling people how to be creative. We're just sharing findings, and people can look through the ABCDs and find one or two things that work really well for them. There's no silver bullets. It's really about inspiring a test and experiment mentality. So what are the ABCDs? A is for attention. How do you grab attention in the first 5 seconds? Remember I mentioned about auditioning, right? And then we go into detail about that. B is for branding. So branding is actually very, very important. How you use branding to drive your objectives. And also branding can drive you to be skipped. So you have to play around with branding in a very, very careful kind of way. C is for connecting. So you've got my attention, you've branded in a meaningful way. How do you then connect with me? AKA, how do you get me watching past the 5 second mark? And then D is for direct, right? Then how do you then make sure your call to actions are impactful and powerful? Now, if you want to know more about the ABCDs, you can simply search YouTube ABCDs and you'll find lots of YouTube videos. You'll find even interesting articles on the ABCDs.
Yeah, that's great. It aligns very much with the Kantar framework. Specifically when you talk about branding, what we say is that we don't ever want to create content or ads where people don't automatically link the brand to that storyline. Otherwise, it's truly just content, which is great, but then a kind of wasted investment, I would say. And then the other one that you mentioned is about being direct, and that speaks to simplicity. So if we come up with these convoluted messages that are difficult to understand and decipher, we're obviously not going to land our message. So yeah, we at Kantar would agree with your framework.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Artwell. I feel like we covered so much in this episode, and I think it's going to spark a lot of ideas for future discussions. We're coming to the end of our discussion, but before we let you go, we like to ask our guests just a few interesting questions to get a glimpse of what interests or excites them. So I'm going to ask you a question. If you could write a book tomorrow, what would you write about?
I think I would write about tomorrow's creative. I know everybody's talking about AI right now and the impact of AI on lots of industries. And what's relevant for us right now is for creatives and the impacts for creatives on both sides of the spectrum. I would love to speak to like the industry's, greatest minds to sort of get an understanding of what the future creative could look like, right? And what that means for the young generation right now that's about to go into university is choosing a creative career, and what that means for those who are seasoned and have been in the industry, and what that means for them going forward. It would be more of an assessment of what has happened in the past and how the creative industries had to change and how that translates to now. So that for me is pretty fascinating. Maybe I might just do that actually.
That feels like
because I would buy that.
Feels like that's something we need to get you on to talk about. In fact, that is really something very interesting to explore, is creative and AI, the generation of creative using AI. Thank you, everybody, Artwell and all of our listeners, for joining us today. For more information, you can follow Insights by Kantar on LinkedIn and X. You can find Future Proof Mzansi on Spotify and YouTube. We encourage you to subscribe, like, rate, and comment. We would love to hear thoughts that you have on future episodes, and we can line up some exciting guests to share more marketing insights with you all. So until next time, thanks for joining us today.